as an architectural historian, the very first thing you want to see is the preservation of the building, right? And so what excited me about the project was that the diocese and the architect and the developer all came together to say, wait a minute, we have a failing structure on our hands. So what are the immediate remedies that we can take to preserve that structure? And I think that was an incredibly courageous, bold, expensive decision.
It became the goal to say, okay, let's not be seduced by what we like, but take it back to what it was. Often you need to take things in context. And so in 1955, where were we? Orange County was just, it was being overtaken, if you will, by the post-war suburban sprawl. Irvine was a ranch. Costa Mesa was the lima bean capital of the world. Walt Disney was down the street just opening up Disneyland in 1955, and Schuller was scribbling outside the lines for the Reformed Church of America by having church in a drive-in of all places. So they grew this church to a point where a few years later they were able to buy some acreage in Garden Grove nearby, and that's when they connected with Richard Neutra.
The Arboretum is conceived as a floating pavilion that opens out to two different paradigms. One is the landscape, to water, to trees, to plantings, to the sky, and the other is opening out to the sea of 600 parked cars. So Schuller attempted to address this new car culture, and he imagined something called a drive-in church. Richard Neutra, who was about 26 years his junior, referred to it as an open-air church, not a drive-in church. But the drive-in church idea responded to people in cars and to a new sensibility and tried to redefine congregation.
So our intent for the Arboretum was really to do a simple refurbishment, but we did understand that the building needed desperately to be air conditioned. And so that started to lead us into a journey that took us into structural upgrades, a really very innovative underfloor air conditioning system, because we didn't want to mount the conditioning equipment and the distribution on the roof. And that led us, really at one point, had us taking the building down to steel and dirt. And the biggest challenge, of course, was this scope of work, which grew dramatically, and grew dramatically during the process, which is not unusual. What is unusual is that we had an extraordinarily tight time frame.
Aesthetically, the goal was to take it back to its period of significance, the mid-60s. What's interesting is to do that while technologically taking it to today. We did a great job from the owner, the contractor, the architect, addressing the issues on the fly, peppering the building department with addendums, and really encouraging the subcontractor community to not think of this as a simple project or another type of project, but as a project candidly for a higher calling. And so while it would whisper us awake in the middle of the night with questions, what are you going to do over here and how are you going to handle this detail, it was and remains one of the great experiences of my short career.
I mean, I've never been in a building in which I believe more strongly that Richard Neutra would have loved to come back and see again.
This is just the first installment in what will ultimately be a $55 million renovation program. And so we felt it very important to set the tone, and the tone would be one of excellence and also of buildings that could work with their inhabitants, that did not force their inhabitants to work within them. And I think we've succeeded on that. We've developed and renovated the Arboretum and its surrounding buildings in such a way that they are a fine community for a fine parish.